to it because I think we have the time to also take one or two questions if there are questions for clarifications or comments or points you'd like expanded. Yes, please.
How did the referendum for the independence of Scotland have an impact on the lives of Muslims? Did you have also some discussions on this?
We had a little bit of discussion, hence my terrible flag, which you can't see has a question mark on it, because tomorrow is the referendum and we don't know if the UK will be the UK anymore or what. But Scotland has a very different national narrative to England anyway, and the discourse amongst Scottish Muslims is quite different to English and Welsh Muslims. In very generally speaking, Scottish Muslims are much more likely to describe themselves as exactly that, Scottish and Muslim, and they are much more likely to describe themselves as Scottish first rather than British. Whereas you'll find the contra in England. Very rarely will you find a person born in England and of Muslim faith calling themselves an English Muslim. So I think their national narratives are very different. I think Scottish Muslims kind of really do identify with the existing history of, I guess, like oppression and things like that. And so the narrative is quite different, and I think that's yielded a very different result as well. So it's really difficult, in my opinion, to sort of compare the two types of Muslims, but it's definitely going to have a massive effect. So I hope they stay, but if they don't, it's up to them. You know, human rights and freedom for all and democracy and all that. So.
Then I have one. If you've discussed bits about the effects of online and particular representations and manifestations of Islamophobia in the online space.
So in terms of the online space, I think almost across all of our countries we discuss, which I didn't really talk about very much, I'm sorry about that, is the rise of far-right political parties and their online participation. So we are talking about, I guess, from my context, the English Defence League, for example, lots and lots of Facebook groups, very active on social media, and a lot of these groups are saying what people want to hear. So they are playing on people's existing fears, for example, you know, people not having jobs or not having enough money in their pockets to buy food, so on and so forth, and using Muslim communities as one of their scapegoats. And their online movement is really quite strong. We do have also another online movement called Britain First that organises mosque invasions across the country, which isn't very nice. But the way these people really mobilize is using the internet, using social media, and especially Facebook groups. The only other thing is that I want to touch on is comments on media stories. So I guess it's the pleasure of being anonymous online. You can say whatever you want without very much retribution or for your comments. So there's lots of stories. For example, the Daily Mail newspaper comes up as a very pertinent example. They will regularly run stories related to immigration and Muslims, and not necessarily always in a very positive light. And you can just see the comments for yourselves underneath. There are thousands, and there are very few that are particularly positive or welcoming. A lot of it is the same rubbish that you might hear over again about send them all back home and so on and so forth. So I do think that the online space is, because of the fact that you're anonymous, it really does have quite a significant impact on the way people express their views, and then how those views are then internalized by the community. So perhaps one thing that I'm seeing is that the community is, on the one hand, attempting to fight back in its own ways, and it is being active, but there's also an element of apathy. There's an element of becoming more insular, becoming protective of one's own community, of thinking, well, we should only maybe take care of ourselves because nobody really likes us or wants us anyway. And that is a very genuine risk of both online and offline hate speech.
Thank you very, very much for a lovely presentation. I think we already have quite a couple of strong points to follow up upon. Could I invite another group then? If not, I start to count the groups. Maybe I go over there. I don't remember the names yet. I'm really sorry. As you prefer.
Our group consisted of persons from me, Norway, and also Belgium, Switzerland, Greece, and Kosovo. And we saw that the Muslim population in the different countries was quite different. In Norway, I think it's about 2%. In Belgium, it was 11.5%. And in Kosovo, it was 95%. But the funny thing is that in Kosovo, they tried their best to disguise themselves because they are afraid of what other European countries think about Muslims, because they see all the news coverage of Islamophobia and negative comments. So they're trying their best to be as secular as possible. Even in the constitution, it states that Kosovo is a secular state, even though it has 95% Muslims. And we also saw a lot of similarities. For instance, in both Belgium and Norway, we have had these pig head attacks. Also, they put pig heads outside of the mosques and write racist comments either on the mosque or at the pig head. There are also a lot of different personal stories about this. Me, for instance, I've received several death threats just because I'm a Muslim. And in Switzerland, it was said that the local community doesn't buy from Muslim shops, and they also ban the minaret and stuff like that. And also in Kosovo, it's forbidden to wear headscarves in both universities and schools, and also some jobs. And again, it's a 95% Muslim country. We also came to a conclusion that we call circle of hate, because when Muslims are being let out of the job market and being having this Islamophobic comments thrown at them, they will feel outside of the society. And when they feel outside of the society, you will find a different place to belong. And often this is criminal groups or extremist groups. And then they travel, for example, to Syria or Iraq. And there will be a lot of media coverage. And this again will fuel up the extreme right, because they will be more afraid of Muslims. And when they get more afraid of Muslims, it will be more Islamophobia and more young Muslims who doesn't feel at home. And actually, I myself felt that when I converted to Islam, because I was like an integrated kid, had a job, good friends, and actually the day I converted, I lost all my friends. I got a lot of problems at work, and my local community turned their backs on me. I heard that I was a traitor, an extremist, terrorist, and that was the first day. And that was like hitting the wall in 1,000 kilometers an hour. I felt how it was to be thrown out of society, and a lot of Muslims feel that way. And then, of course, we will try to find a way to find a place to be safe, to belong. And I found that in a radical group. I was there for a year until I found out that, of course, it wasn't anything for me. I don't support violence. But that became my home, because I felt like I had no other place to belong. And I think a lot of Muslims feel that way. And for me, that was because of the discrimination towards me. Also, I believe that perhaps the far-right movements also have some kind of similar stories, that there is a reason they are there. And this is what we call the circle of hate. Yeah.
I think it's a very strong also story to share, not only the results of the discussion, and thank you for doing that. Questions, comments? Yes, please ask me.
Yes, thank you for summarizing your group's comments, but also for sharing your own story. And particularly, and it was a point I wanted to make but didn't have time, and I'm glad you made it, was this connection between Islamophobia and extremism. And for a lot of youth in the West, I know even in the research I was doing, I was looking at this question, because I believe there's a nexus between these things, right? And, you know, the way that youth are being pushed to the fringes and borders of belonging within the nation forces them to look for other alliances and other places, as you say, to feel at home and to find a home. And I think that that gets lost. That analysis and that understanding gets lost too often, because it's just seen as, well, they're radical because, you know, this is what the religion teaches them. And they, you know, no one's looking at, well, what kind of conditions get created for, you know, youth to be pushed to the fringes and then to align themselves with these kinds of groups and organizations. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing that point, because it's a very important nexus between Islamophobia and, for some youth, not all, a small number who do get pushed beyond those borders. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm looking to see if there's other comments or questions. No. Then thank you very much. I think there's a number of points that were raised, especially the one that also highlights the patterns for radicalizations and the opportunities for radicalization, but also the causes, because many times we talk, and I've seen also this discussion quite current, you know, how do young people radicalize and so on. It's very much concentrated around Muslim youth without also looking at other radical movements that are also quite popular right nowadays among young people. And thank you very much for bringing that one up. I would like to then invite another group. Joseph, would you like to, can do it from there or here? Yeah.
In our group, we had the countries Bosnia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Belgium, and the UK. So I'll try not to repeat anything that has already been spoken about in those countries. We tried to make some observations, sort of grouping the countries together, or some generalizations we could try and make. And we noted that, and also Armenia we had. Armenia, yeah. We noted that Armenia and Hungary both have quite small Muslim populations, but that there is still Islamophobia prevalent within those societies. In Armenia, that is particularly because of a political conflict with Turkey. So racism and Islamophobia are sort of tied in together with a narrative of the enemy of a Turkish or Muslim oppressor. And this tied into the idea of the iceberg of ideas that mainly it's a long historical ideology that's been created. Even though there are not many Muslims in the country, there's a very small minority. There's still this ideology. In Bulgaria, there was a higher Muslim population, approximately 1 million Muslims, and also approximately 1 million Roma people population, in a country with about 10 million citizens in total. And it was noted that it's quite a taboo in Bulgaria just to talk about minority issues, partly because of the history of Ottoman rule for many centuries in the country. And then when we looked at Bosnia, and we made some observations that actually the Balkans has quite a specific historical background, being many of the countries being post-Ottoman and post-communist, and there was a distinction here where, compared to the rest of Europe, where most of the ideologies are based on migration. And then in the UK and in Belgium, we sort of grouped those two together a bit and noted that 9/11 was a particular turning point in Islamophobic discourse in those countries. And then in terms of how Islamophobia manifests itself in the online and offline spheres, and from speech to action, we also noted how far-right political parties in the UK, Bulgaria and Belgium are using Islam as their main focus, as the main enemy, as their main opposition, and then also using the human rights rhetoric about that they are the victims of an outsider pressure. Whereas the situation in Hungary is a bit different, where anti-Semitism is used a lot more by the far-right party Jobbik, because there's a higher Jewish population in Hungary. And then, yeah, we noted how Facebook pages are being used also to organize mobilizations of the far-right and protests. In terms of causes for Islamophobia, we noted the main cause being the media, and especially the use of language within media articles. For example, talking about, rather than a group of Muslims, that it was described as an army of Muslims. And yeah, this is, I think, also even prevalent in academic discourse about migration and things, where it's quite often language is used such as waves of migration or flows, and it always has the implication of, a huge change. So, and also especially how history plays a big part in the causes, and politics, because so there's different manifestations of Islamophobia in each country based on the different histories of those countries. And yeah, finally, just a note in terms of consequences. Some personal experiences were shared about how, yeah, even though somebody will be a citizen of a country, they have a shared history, they're still perceived, they're perceived as an outsider. So yeah, it touches into this idea of belonging and yeah, if anybody from the group wants to add anything that I missed, then they're welcome to, but I think that's everything there.
There was also a consideration that hate speech online and offline against Muslim people brings a consequence from which the identity of Muslim people suffers, because one of members of our group told a story that she was seeking a job wearing a hijab and she was rejected everywhere because she was considered to be different. So we concluded that in some countries and sometimes Islamophobia may be demonstrated as a specific part of xenophobia, because people are afraid of people who are somehow or in some way distinguished from themselves. And that's why the identity and the uniqueness of Muslim people suffers. Some people try to change, some people resist, they don't cease to be the way they are, but some people, they may say, okay, I'm going to take off my hijab to get the job because life will become easier. And that's why the diversity and their identity suffers. There was some kind of consideration like this.
Thank you very much also for your presentation. I think they also deserve applause. No? And then I open the floor for questions or comments. We had this completion of. No, I sense there's a lot of level of tiredness in this group right now. Okay, do you want an energizer before we move to the next presentation? Maybe? Would that help? Yes? No? Are you still there? Yeah? You're still here? We go on or we do an energizer quickly? A sitting energizer. A sitting energizer, so I'm not going to make you stand up. Yeah, just to break a bit. Are you ready to do it? Yeah? Okay, then lead them through the energizer and then... I think we can.
And now put your hands like this. All right?
Like this.
So I'm seeing the person here. Okay. So what you're going to do, like in one person, you have to put your palm of your hand like this. And the other one like this. You see? And you have to put the hands.
One like this and one like this. So if you have this one, I have to put it like this and then...
Use the left hand with the palm and the right hand with the finger. Alright?
So one hand is with the finger and one is with the palm, huh?
Okay? And you need to put your hand on the finger of the other person and beat your rest of the other.
One like that and one like that. Yeah, that's good.
Are we managing?
And we just miss some people.
Okay? So when I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, what you need to do, you need to catch the finger of the person and escape from the other one next to you. Okay? Is it clear? So I say 1, 2, 3. Again. 1, 2, 3.
I think I must sleep myself. But
Let's try it one more time. Last revenge, last attempt. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
thank you, Christina. Good. I hope all fingers are in where they were before we started. Nothing on the floor. Good. Can I ask then the next group to present?
Do they see this on the live stream?
I think they can try at home. Christina can tell us if it was on live stream or not. It was.
We're not using the microphone, so they can use like gloves and some kind of background noise and camera upstairs.
So they're not seeing much.
Live streaming, trying to catch the other person who has our troubles. You're not live streaming.
Although I think it's a good exercise to try at home with parents every now and then. But still, can I invite the next group to present us? I don't think we had 5 presentations. No. Still, I'm counting well. Good. Who is still left? Aha. Group number 2. And I see a lot of exchange of looks. And they're volunteering each other. So we make a point to the group that it's nice.
So the countries that were represented in our group are Ireland, Macedonia, Russia, Turkey, and the Netherlands. And we have a great diversity concerning the issue of Islamophobia in these countries. For example, in Turkey, as the representative of Turkey said, there is no Islamophobia, but there are some Syrian refugees, and the residents complain that they're taking their jobs. So it's connected with the media image of Syria and Arab people in general. And sometimes non-Islamic people are discriminated. In the Netherlands, the issue is growing rapidly, and it's sometimes connected with the politicians that can say whatever they want without being accountable for that. In the last 5 or 6 years, Muslim women don't feel comfortable wearing hijabi. It's like they have to put a sign on this, I don't believe in radicalism, or I don't have a relation to this radical movement. And in Ireland, there's 1% of the population who's Muslim, and the Muslim organizations usually tied to the mosques, and there's little youth work happening with Muslim youth. So, and the problem is with legislation, which is sometimes flawed, which makes it difficult to report racist crimes. Sometimes the media coverage is misinterpret facts or interpret them too broadly, and such articles appear like, what are we going to do about returning jihadi? In Macedonia, the term Islam is not used because it's represented mainly by the Turkish minority and the Albanian minority, and the terms the Turkish and the Albanians are used. There are more than 20% of Albanians. So the Turkish people are integrated into the community and they are spread around the country, while Albanians are concentrated in one place, and that's where discrimination occurs. But there are laws that say that 1/3 of the minority should be represented in the parliament. So there is legislation that prevents discrimination, at least in legislative sphere. In Russia, we spoke about extremism and the general course of the government that for 10 or 15 years states its course as combating extremism, but sometimes the law is misinterpreted and it causes Islamophobia. For example, there was a case about Quran translation by Khalif, and this translation was considered extremistic by the lower court, and then the higher court cancelled the decision. That was a big issue in the community. On the legislative level, there are a lot of national republics, most population of which, the majority of population of which is Muslim, and all republics are represented in the federal parliament, and there is equal representation. But the problem of Islamophobia is acute in big cities, and sometimes it is connected with migrants from Central Asia. Among the possible causes that we discussed is radicalism, media coverage, and there are historical causes. As for the manifestations online and offline, we mentioned name-calling, negative remarks connected with Muslim migrants, and hateful online discourse about mosque building in some areas. Also, in the Netherlands, for example, a few years ago, such cases as throwing stones into mosques or pieces of block were happening often, or people could speed in the street when they saw women in race cars, and there were demonstrations against mosque building. Also, when I speak about media coverage, sometimes, well, not sometimes, but it's everyday stuff that there are reports on TV about Muslims committing crime, as if that's only committed by Muslims. And politicians often use people's ignorance of Islam to get votes and to create tension. In Turkey, there were some episodes of fake news about a group that is non-Muslim. So there were fake news showing them that they go into mosques in shoes or they drink beer, so to represent them in bad light. If I forgot anything or you have some comments to add, so please do so.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Questions, comments? No. Applauses then. All right, and I think we still have one group. Yes? No? Maybe? They're still in the pointing exercise, I can see. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Let me just find my notes. I think a lot of the things are already mentioned as well this time as well. That's much better. So we had UK, Norway, Cyprus, Belgium, and Germany in our group. I think one very interesting point that was the difference between the UK and especially London maybe and continental Europe with regards to, and I mean some of the myths were debunked as well. It's not a complete safe haven, the UK either, but there is, I think, a difference between the UK or between London and a lot of kind of continental European cities in terms of integration, in terms of acceptance of being different, which is, and in terms of, you know, what the we includes. And I think that goes to the core of what this is really about, and also the whole idea of, and the connection, we've talked a lot about the connection between extremism and Islamophobia as well, and when you don't find a place for you in the big we, you find a place somewhere else, and I think that's very, very, very important. It goes back to what Yusuf said as well. In terms of how big the populations are, the Muslim communities are in the different countries, I think in Cyprus it's about 10% of the population, in Germany it's about 5 million Muslims, in Norway I think there's about 2%, yeah, 2%, in Belgium about between 4 to 6%, and in the UK 5%. Let me just see my notes. And we talked in terms of how does Islamophobia manifest itself in the public sphere. We talked about counterterrorism and the whole discourse on that. Islamophobic stereotypes in school books, examples of that. The hijab debate is recurring, especially in Norway, over and over and over and over again. The same debate with different names. And the whole gendered kind of part of Islamophobia, which I think is a very important, very, very important part of this whole thing, and how kind of other human rights issues are used against Muslims and are used against Islam. Freedom of speech, women, these issues kind of are used to show them, you know, the danger of Islam by certain groups. And I think we also mentioned hate crimes. A lot of, I mean, they were shocking for me, a lot of kind of attempts at burning mosques in different cities, or vandalizing graveyards, Muslim graveyards, really grave hate crimes, you know. And let me see, what else? And also some interesting stories from Germany about kind of how teachers can have a very negative way of approaching Muslims, approaching Islam, and taking young girls out of the class and suggesting for them to go to special courses on, you know, emancipation or empowerment. There are the young girls, and just because they happen to wear the hijab, which I think is so, I mean, this needs to be reported somewhere for sure. We also talked about, and I think this is a very important point, about Islamophobia in politics, and how politicians use Islamophobia very strategically, and especially when there's elections. And we also talked about discrimination of association. Roma people, Sikhs, Hindus that look like Muslims, hate crime against those kind of groups, the same things that you mentioned in your talk as well. And harassment in the working place. And we need to talk about media and the role that the media plays in, and the whole, like, in their kind of, in their pursuit of, you know, the sensational news, how they use Muslims to sell newspapers, and how the whole kind of economic crisis of the media as well is a factor in this, because you become desperate in your, you know, you want to sell your newspaper so desperately that you go to kind of the extremes. The Daily Mail is a good example. Let me see. And the possible causes of Islamophobia, we mentioned the social and economic crisis in Europe and kind of the scapegoating of Muslims, and this is, historically, this is a very well-known mechanism. When there is a crisis, you find a group to blame it on. It's a very, very well-known strategy. Media's portrayal again, fear of the unknown, ignorance and kind of the media in combination. And I also think I think secularism is a very important part of this. Expressing religion is very difficult in Europe today, and is, from what I understand, I don't know the American context as well as good, but I think there's a difference between the US at least and Europe in this regard. God is just not present as much in kind of the discourse among politicians, among, the public discourse in Norway and in the rest of Europe, I think, than in America. There's a very different, and the whole role of secularization in this whole thing, and when you've got rid of Christianity in the public sphere, in a sense. I'm personally Christian. That's a very normal thing to say in Norway. They don't say it to a lot of people, but they can say it to you because they see that you're religious, and then they kind of whisper, I'm personally Christian as well, because you don't really talk about it. And kind of this expectation that, you should be a personal Muslim as well, not a public Muslim, but a private Muslim, please. And so I think that's an important thing as well. And also the rise of right-wing movements, of course. And what is the role of Islamophobic hate speech in the online space and the situation of the Muslim community? I think it does, or we think, I'm sorry. Whenever I say I really mean we. It's just important. We think it justifies discrimination. It destroys every attempt at, social cohesion and building bridges. It leads to hate crime, and we have a lot of examples of that. We also talked a lot about identity crisis among young Muslims in Europe, kind of, and this whole, dichotomy of, you can't be Muslim and European at the same time, which makes a lot of young people kind of seek a sense of belonging somewhere else. This goes back to extremism as well. We also talked about how many tags from Germany are actually emigrated to, I want to say back to, because a lot of them have been in Germany their whole life, but a lot of people are choosing to move back to, or move to their parents' country because they just don't feel like there's a place for them in the country that they've lived in their whole life. And we talked about self-oppression and the creation of alternative societies, a society within the society, because because of this whole sense of belonging and the importance of it. But I think this is important to kind of end whatever you do with something positive, and I think there is something positive out of this whole thing, and that is, it's kind of a democratizational kind of effect of it, because what this leads to is an increase in participation from Muslim communities in human rights groups, in initiating human rights organizations to work to combat these issues, and that's definitely a positive effect of this. And I'm sure we can find other positive things as well. Did I forget anything? I did? How do you? Did I forget anything? That last point was his, so I just have to. Well, that was it. Thank you.
Any questions or comments, please?
No question. I would add something. In Greece, in my sense, and I think the Helsinki monitors the same thing, we suffer more from xenophobia than from Islamophobia. there is a clear sign that we suffer also from Islamophobia, that there is no mosque in the capital of Greece, in Athens, where the half of the population lives and most of the migrants and the asylum seekers. But I would like to hear some things or some discussion about the way we're talking about Islamophobia and when we are talking about xenophobia, because it's difficult, very difficult to distinguish. Also in other countries, my sense is also that happens in other countries.
Just to give you a few explanations on this, the debate on what is the main motivation of a hate crime or a discrimination is ongoing. Whatever the prejudice and whatever the target group we are talking about. When, for example, someone attacks a lady, a Pakistani lady in the street, is it because of her origin? Is it because she's a woman? Is it because she was in a specific area or she did or say something that triggered in the perpetrator's behavior the will to take action? The same goes with incidents that can be related to xenophobia or anti-Muslim sentiment or Islamophobia. The thing you need to look at is what is the general pattern and what is your framework, what is your explanatory framework for these turning into action. So on the political context, you can see clearly that in some European countries there has been a turning point where the anti-immigrant discourse slightly shifted into the anti-Muslim discourse. Because at that time there was a negative premium associated with being openly, blatantly racist and being openly and blatantly hostile to anyone coming from outside that he's a migrant working in a legally acceptable framework. But based on a sense of a manipulated identity or misunderstood forms of secularism, there has been progressively an acceptance of an anti-Muslim rhetoric. At that point, when the far right identified, understood that it was politically more efficient to shift from explicit xenophobia to hidden Islamophobia, that's where the discourses and the narratives started changing. But when you look at the perpetrator's profile and the general justification that they give, and I will touch on this during my speech, you can clearly see that all of this is mixed up in one feeling, and then the explanations that are related to religion, ethnicity, origin, come only when they have to justify themselves. They say, oh, I did this because he was provoking me. Okay, what did he do? Well, he was having a beard. Okay, but this is not illegal. Yeah, but his behavior was somehow strange. And you relate to his religion or then his ethnicity, and you find what is going to be the most efficient in a given context. So that's for the political environment. Then for the framework of analysis, in social sciences, there has been this idea that some discrimination, some hate crimes are intersectional. What does it mean? That there is not only one bias that bears all the explanatory power, but then you have intersections of different bias, a bias that is anti-gypsy, a bias that is gender-based, a bias that is based on the religion or the alleged religion of the person, and that they contribute to the behavior of the perpetrator. It doesn't mean that the victim did something that makes her deserve the action that took place, but this is intermingled, intertwined in the perpetrator's behavior. So in social science, it is quite difficult to disentangle these interaction, but in statistics, you do have tools to evaluate the joint effect of different factors. So you can, when you look at data, and that's why it's so important to compile data on hate crimes and discrimination, you can isolate some specific parameters and you look at the single impact of that one. What is the gender impact on hate crimes and discrimination? What is the visibility impact of religious symbols on the perpetrators? So the only that's for the explanation. Now the recommendation I would give is not to stick to one specific rhetoric in identifying one single form of racism, but understand that as political landscape shifts, the same would go with the bias on the side of the perpetrators. And at the same time, in all your analysis, in all your production and all your research, you need to have a framework that is wide enough, open enough to account for these different realities.
I hope that answers a bit your question and your comment. If there are other comments or points to raise? Yes, please, Joseph.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that was already mentioned about, just about being positive as well. Well, and also the sort of what was also said before about the danger of human rights activists creating their own sort of certain discourse or framework, and how that can be just perceiving Muslims only as victims, without agency, without their own choices. And I can only speak from personal experience of being a Muslim. I can't speak for anyone else. Everyone will have different experiences of being a Muslim. But yeah, personally, it's still great being a Muslim for myself. It's still a great experience, and you have your own you have your enjoy your life kind of thing. And so just to make that point as well, that it's just not all being a victim being a Muslim. So yeah, just so journalists don't create that kind of image.
I think it's an important point to make, because especially in context like this, where we look on how how discrimination, how intolerance, how Islamophobia manifests, you tend to get also quite it goes down and it's gloomy, and it seems that let's not deny it. It's gloomy. It's a sad reality, and hopefully it motivates us to also act. But it's not the only aspect of life as well. So thank you for making that point. And I think the other thing that I wanted to say, that sometimes by being target, you're not necessarily also a victim. So I think we also need to have that nuance, and also not to categorize people, to victimize people, and also put this, label as well, and also understand that there might be a difference between being a target and being able to also respond and counter, and being a victim as well. And I think some people stay very strong by the differentiation. Thank you very much. I think we covered a great deal in this session, and this gives us also a very good basis for looking at responses tomorrow. I think we've heard a lot in terms of causes about historical experiences or past not being passed on or thought about in a way that is also condoning prejudice and stereotype. We speak a lot about lack of understanding and knowledge about faith and different religions and practices. Sometimes I've heard also about our own, and I think that's, I also am a very good example of that in terms of upbringing. So I can have some empathy towards that. We spoke a lot about promotion and adoption of simple imagery, also through the examples that Jasmine said, and many of them that you've also shared in your presentations. We've also looked at questions of power and minority and majority, and we've also realized that it's not only about being a minority or being a majority. I mean, we've seen the example of Kosovo, and still this need to respond and comply. And I think it's important to bear in mind that it's not only a question of numbers, but it's also a question of power. And it's also not only a question sometimes localized to a certain community, but it's more broader, so we have to see it also in a global context when looking at it. I think we've spoken a lot, and I thank Marwan for making that point about intersectionality and multiple discrimination, so the association with being a woman, with being immigrant, and so on and so forth. And I think that is important to keep in mind when we look tomorrow on how we operate on that, and how do we respond to that. And then we've looked at quite a number of consequences, also in terms of identity, in terms of self-oppression, in terms of community, trying to hold together and sometimes separate. We've looked at patterns of radicalization, and this as also a consequence of discrimination, of constant discrimination. We look at various manifestations. I think it has been quite impressive, and I think it's time that we maybe shift a bit. We start to shift a bit, and we start to look at how do we react to this. And if you still have energy, we still wanted to share a bit from the work of OSCE and from the movement, which are two frameworks that we can use to respond to this, especially in the context of our seminar. And for this, Marwan and myself, we wanted to give you some information. I'm afraid it's still within the framework of a presentation. So I'm looking at you if I should invite Christina to do another sitting, moving energizer before, or bathroom break. I'm being whispered. An energizer? Yes, I can see some nodding, wishful. Do you have one in your sleeve? Does anybody have one? I'm sure. No, we can require standing, I think, this time.
I'm sorry.
I will also try to be funny.
There is no break.
If you don't need that place, then go to the circle. Let's put it this way. It's okay. Some people went to a different kind of energy. Yes.
Okay, so really quick thinking. Not too much movement, just to keep enough energy. So we are having these positions. No, the chairs would have been better, but okay, so I asked you to pick one person in the room. Doing enough to mention that, and this person in the room is going to be the sun. So we're really lacking a bit of like sun because we're in the room. So this person is going to be your sun. What you need to do, you need to make 3 circles around this person. Okay? You have the person in your mind? 1, 2, 3. One is randomly, just for now. Have you got your son? Yes? Ready to make 3 circles around your person? Okay? 3, 2, 1, find your son. pending still when I'm on it. But okay, cool. Thank you. Get back to us. You can also see commentaries. It's really up to you how you feel comfortable. Don't feel defensive on it. It's really up to you where you see.
Okay, I see chairs are more comfortable for day one. Fine. We're going to break that pattern tomorrow.
Actually, I was looking outside today thinking the small groups have gone to the garden to do their discussions.
Yeah.
Because it was so nice out.
I know. But it can be also so loud out.
Is it?
No. It's hard to go in that toilet. Pardon?
Yeah.
The ladies. But when we have someone, then it is one toilet. It took us years to get it. Okay, good. I see I've lost half of the group suddenly. I think there's still some search for the sun in other areas of the building. But I would suggest that we move on because it's been a long day and we should get closer to closing the day as well. Good, then with no further ado, then I pass the floor to Marwan to introduce. Yes, I would appreciate if you can start, if you don't mind.
Okay.
To introduce you to the work of OSCE and ODIHR and also his experience, and then we're going to look at the movement.
Okay. So this morning, Azra gave you an overview of the work of the OSCE, the work that ODIHR, the Human Rights Branch, is doing in that framework. Okay, so I will elaborate more a number of suggestions, a number of recommendations that I would find useful if I was an NGO working with ODIHR or within the OSCE. The first thing we need to look at is what is our understanding of the phenomenon we're looking at. Okay, and usually you start with a book, or you start with a series of articles, or you start with reality. So where do you gather information on reality? Well, in the hate crimes and discriminations, and that's where you'll find the most powerful data, the most powerful piece of information that is going to build for you a basis that you can analyze. Okay, so if you look at the perpetrator's profile, okay, there you can find very useful information. If you look at a hate crime, the first question you want to ask yourself is, okay, what happened? How did it happen? Why did it happen? And as soon as you've raised the question why, you're looking for explanatory factors. Okay, what is the cause of the perpetrator using this type of behavior, turning into action? What is the key factor that explains this? Okay, for a very long time, people have believed that the explanation, the causal explanation, lies in the victim's behavior. Okay, but it puts a huge pressure on the victim. Did the victim do something that would justify, that would explain the behavior of the perpetrator? Okay, and if so, can we say that the dress code of a lady would explain causally a rape, a physical assault, a series of insults, a series of gender-based declaration and hateful speech, or is it in the perpetrator's behavior? Okay. The question is not easily answered, but with the data you can try and understand how do the perpetrator turn into action. Is it a long-term plan, hate crime or discrimination? Has it been decided in the last few minutes? And if you do look at this data, you find out that you have very interesting results. The first result is that most of hate crimes and discrimination, especially when we look at Muslim communities as a target group, they are decided in the 15 minutes before turning into action. Okay, so there's no long-term sense of premeditation, and that's why you do not have groups planning wide-scale attacks on Muslim target groups. The second thing you find out is that the problem, the causal power, really lies in the perception of the potential victim of the target by the perpetrator. He believes that wearing a headscarf is already past the red line. She believes that you are going to help a Muslim woman by taking off her hijab. He has watched maybe too many TV series, and he perceives the length of a beard as a security risk, as a security issue. So in the interaction between the two, and in the perception of the one over the other, lies the construction of the feeling, the construction of the perception that is going to enable him to take action. Which explains that when you look at their social, economic, political profile, they do not look like a right-wing extremist or a far-right extremist. You do have some, but the typical perpetrator looks like the typical citizen, okay? Which proves something essential, is that all of us are receptive to stereotypes and cliches. None of us is immune to anti-Roma prejudice, to anti-Muslim, to anti-black, to anti-Semitic prejudice. In a sense, we are always the racist of someone, okay? Which explains that you have to fight patterns and behavior instead of identifying groups and fighting individuals or typical citizens, okay? So, when you look at these ideologies, at this perception, you feel and you understand that they are ingrained, they are deep-rooted, and for this reason, rational speech, academic speech, diplomatic speech has no reach on it. Okay? You don't change an irrational perception with rational speech. You understand this very basic idea. If it lies in somewhere irrational, if it lies in somewhere deeply emotional, then cognitive speech alone will not suffice to change it. Okay? It is absolutely necessary. So you do need to have evidence, you need to deconstruct ideologies, to question cliches, you need to do all of this, but it's not sufficient. And the same goes with legal action. Okay? A lot of human rights structure engage in human rights advocacy, or they will provide victims with legal and psychological support, and this is absolutely necessary. This is vital, okay? Because that's the most efficient way of creating and producing jurisprudence that is going then to avoid a number of other instances of the cases. But it's not sufficient on the long term. And that's where educational projects take all their meaning. And that's why, in a sense, ODIHR and the Council of Europe and the UNESCO have found that building these guidelines is not only going to help limit some immediate impact of Islamophobia. No, it's going to empower NGOs, it's going to empower civil servants, it's going to empower all communities on the long term to understand the roots of Islamophobia and be proactive, be preventive in tackling these issues, in tackling anti-Muslim intolerance. So, the approach that has to be taken, and this is the key message that I would like to deliver to our friend NGOs and activists, is that the approach to tackling any form of racism and anti-Muslim intolerance specifically has to be pluralistic, has to include different dimensions. It's not one over the other. No, it's all of these methodologies that have to be looked at in a holistic approach and combined with one another. These approaches are complementary to one another. They are not exclusive of one another. So you do need to have, in every country, an NGO or an equality body that is going to provide victims or potential victims with legal support, psychological support, because you will have discrimination and you will have hate crimes. That's the first part. But you also need to have a vibrant and rich academic production that is going to provide concepts and ideas and explanations for understanding the phenomenon that we're looking at. And in addition to this, you need to have other projects, educational projects, but also artistic projects, media-related projects that are going to combine and help build a holistic strategy, a pluripolar strategy. So in the guidelines, you will find a number of tools that are of interest if you are a teacher, if you are a parent, if you are a civil servant, an NGO, or just if you engage into educational issues. I could sum them up in three aspects. The first part, basically, is to understand. The second part is about practice, and the third part is about challenging. Okay, so you'll find this decomposition not necessarily by chapter, but the beginning of the guidelines are about basically understanding. What do I mean by understanding? Well, like I was saying, we need to understand the phenomenon that we're looking at from an analytical perspective. Take some distance about the role that we play as an activist, as an advocate, as a community leader, and try to understand that what we're talking about. What is the most conceptual framework for addressing it? How to name it? What are the key factors that can explain the rise or the decline of this phenomenon? What am I doing and what am I building as a strategy, as a rational strategy to address something irrational? Okay? And by the way, what part of it is irrational? Okay? We can not excuse the perpetrator and discriminant by explaining that this is irrational, they're doing it randomly, they are very emotional about it. But as Jasmine was explaining this morning, these emotions or these perceptions translate into some form of systemic prejudice, systemic discrimination. When we look at patterns of excluding Muslim women wearing a headscarf from access to education, from access to work, and we see that there is a resistance from equality bodies, from governments sometimes, to take some action, what was a perception, what was emotional, becomes structural. Okay? And so we cannot excuse as a whole, or we cannot blame it on just something irrational that lies into feelings that we don't want to hurt this feeling, we need to educate them, but it's not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient. And so on the terminology, on the semantics, I will not go into details. What is most important is that you find, every one of you, in your context, what is the expression or what is the concept that has the best efficiency, that is going to work for you. In our context at OSCE ODIHR, the expression of intolerance and discrimination against Muslims is the most potent. Okay? In a diplomatic framework with a diversity of states, each one of them having their own agenda, within our mandate, that's the most efficient. You'll find that anti-Muslim racism or Islamophobia or anti-Muslim prejudice is going to work for you better in different conditions. So one thing is to really choose, after having studied the case, which concept is the most powerful for you. Once we have done this understanding and this analysis, that's where we put into practice. Okay? And in the guidelines, you have a number of exercises that are suggested. These exercises, what are they meant for? Why do we suggest, like, not childish exercise, but really practices and experiences that we need to work on and put into play? I'll take a very simple example. There is a famous academic in France. His name is Jean Bobéro. He's the top researcher. He's the top academic in the history of secularism and laïcité, which is the French version of this. He's a very honorable person, and he lives in a quite deprived area. He never chose. He's not looking for a fancy place, and then he watches from his balcony the life of his project. And there was his neighbor having her young girl playing in the street, and then comes a black man, and the girl says, "Mom, look, there's a black man." And the mother says, "But that's not a black man, that's our neighbor." Okay? So the whole point here is that human experience, social experience, destroys the perception, destroys the othering of the black person, of the Muslim person, of the Roma person, of the female colleague that has to be seen only through this frame. Human interaction, social experience with different people breaks the othering process, because I feel more empathy, because I feel that we are from the humankind, and we can feel for each other different perceptions that are positive, instead of just seeing the other through his religion, through his dress code, through his color. Okay? So these exercises, they allow each one of us to take some distance from our own prejudice, from our own stereotypes, but also behind the line, they allow people to have a different mode of interaction. Okay? That's why they are so essential. Imagine a school where teachers and students can talk freely about racism, change perception, put themselves in another position through game plays, through role plays, and you'll have an idea of what these guidelines can do for you. And the last part of the guidelines is about challenge. Okay? Challenge the status quo. Okay? Challenge the current state of the situation. We all feel that there is a number of key problems, that there is a number of injustice, and that this becomes a very bad situation. So we need to challenge this status quo. And that's why at the end of the guidelines, you have two sections that provide you with references. Okay? If you want to challenge a specific system, a specific distribution of events, you have to play within the rules. You have to understand these rules. So you cannot, if you want to engage with international organizations, you cannot say, you, the UN, are doing nothing for my community, you're doing nothing for my area, you're doing nothing for my country. No, you have to understand how this organization works and understand what are the mechanisms, what are the key decisions that I can use to say, I'm not asking you to be kind to my country, I'm not asking you to be kind to the community that I'm supposed to represent, I'm just asking you to respect your commitment that you took on this date and that you're responsible to be accountable for. That's what I'm asking you. And you cannot do this if you do not know the references and the key mechanism. So I'll end up with the suggestions I wanted to make for NGOs who want to engage at the international level. The first thing is to understand international organizations. That's what I've explained to you. The second thing is to participate when possible in international events. Every year, for example, OSCE holds in Warsaw what we call the Human Dimension meeting. It is a very important conference where all governments are represented within the OSCE, and it's open to civil society. So as an NGO, you can come to the conference, you can have a speech ready, you can ask questions to participating states, you can organize side events if you have one specific issue and you want to raise it. Okay? You can organize this, and it's open to you. Not every international organization is so open, and so you need definitely to take advantage of this. Organizations like ours are at their best when NGOs and civil society fully play their role, and that's your responsibility. The third part is to produce actionable content. If you have something to say, produce content that can be relevant, that can be interesting for someone that doesn't necessarily know your local political game, the subtleties, the nuances of your area. Okay? So imagine that you are reporting to fellow NGOs on another continent or to a media on the other side of the world. If you were to produce an annual report, a monthly newsletter, a series of explanatory or pedagogical videos, how would you go about it? Make them, produce them, and make them available through social networks, through your website, and this is very important in your advocacy work. The fourth point is to contact us. We do not work on specific individual cases, but if there is a pattern, for example, all of you were mentioning women wearing a headscarf as a key typical target of discrimination or hate speech, okay, then we can be looking at this and we can identify these issues, these generic type of discrimination in our annual report. The fifth point is to work in cooperation together. I mean, one of the motivation of such an event If it was just to circulate this or to promote this, we'll have sent a very nice package. But one additional value of coming together here is for you to mingle. It's for you to come together. It's for you to understand what the other person is saying. And I can tell you, for having done the exercise, when you look at a list of NGOs with titles and websites, this gives you some information, but not the information on the operational capability of this NGO, the way they deal with the concept, the way they interact, how realistic they are in their claim. So this is very important, and then you can, after this meeting, continue with this relationship. The sixth point, and that's almost the last one, is to use data for advocacy. Okay? When I try to address these issues, I put myself in the shoes of an NGO in survival mode. Okay? So if we are in survival mode, what is it? Okay, we have no money. We are in a country where the problem is massive. The government doesn't want to speak to us. Okay? The media are against us. Okay, and when we talk to the community, we're trying to help. They say, well, there's no point, forget about it. Okay, so that's the survival mode. So if you're in a survival mode, what would be the thing that cannot fail? The thing that cannot fail is to be helpful to the people you're trying to help when they need you. That's why we need legal and psychological support, because someone can tell you there's no point, but when his wife is being discriminated or when he's being fired from his job, he's going to come and ask you, okay, can you help me? And then you say, yes, I can. Okay? Yes, we can. The second thing that cannot fail is to compile information from these cases. If you go meet with your Minister of Education or with your MP and you say, well, we think there is an Islamophobia problem in our area near London or near Paris or in Brussels, say, how many votes can you bring to me? That's my key question. Okay, so either it's a political game, to call in French a rapport de force, power struggle, or you do have evidence for what you're talking about. Say, we're not talking politics here. You are in office, and you have a duty, a responsibility to be accountable on these issues and these issues and these issues. One single event is just a story. 300 event is a phenomenon. Having data allows you to evidence the phenomenon you're talking about, prove that this is a reality, and come to terms with the responsibilities of our governments, of our institutions. Okay? So that's the difference between a claim that can be valid but not evidence-based, which has no institutional traction and performance in that area, and a valid claim that is going to be expressed in valid terms and that is going to reach its objective. And the last part is to take part, to be present when we have trainings and events. We have a number of events organized every year by ODIHR and OSCE. Some of them are trainings, okay, and you can participate in these trainings just like you are present today. And on our website, you will find a large number of resources. Devote half a day, a few hours just to look through these resources, and you'll find that you have major tools for advocating your cause. I can confess, coming from the NGO world, that the work done by ODIHR has been a school for me, not only in the diplomatic game or in the diplomatic framework, but also at the national level. This has been not only a tool for educating people, it was first a tool to educate ourselves. What is a structured process to address the form of racism that we're talking about? Okay. Finally, I'd like to thank you for your attention and end up with a positive note. Chaos is going to be the word that you will find most often in the media or in the economic literature to describe the current condition of the OSCE region and specifically Europe. Okay? And you will find that people are competing with discourses of deception, disappointment, sadness, decline. Okay? But chaos benefits to people having a plan. So while people are being agitated about the current economic situation, or people having political crises in modern democracies and so on and so forth, people who have a plan, they keep their consistency and they continue working toward their objectives. Okay? So do not see this situation as the end of the story. See this situation as a time of opportunity. An opportunity to take more action on the human rights aspect, an opportunity to raise the question, what binds us together apart from our differences? Okay? What makes us one people? What makes us one mankind? What makes us alike even though we have our differences? See this time as a time of opportunity, okay? Opportunity and responsibility. Because the worst part when a continent, when a country goes into populism and racism, is not the violence of the extremes, it's the silence of the majority. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if you have questions for Marwan. Yes, I can see one already.
I have two questions. The first one is, how can we collect some information, as we know that for several countries we don't use the same methodology, and how could you compare, like OSCE, these results? And my second question is about what we call institutional discrimination. What's happened when we have some responsible of a government and they agree some principles, some requirements, some targets about human rights, and we notice in the reality that they don't respect it. Thank you.
So on the first question, I'm not going to enter into methodological issues of hate crimes and discrimination statistics. What I'm going to explain is that different methodologies can be used and can be reconciled if some parts of the data is comparable. Okay? But comparing hate crimes in the UK or comparing hate speech in the UK versus France, I tell you frankly, methodologically sometimes has absolutely no meaning. Which brings us to the advocatical function of data. If you ask me the question, okay, last year in France or in the UK we have recorded 700 hate crimes and discrimination against Muslims, is that it? I tell you, these numbers, they don't mean anything if we are really to quantify the phenomenon. 600 cases is the human operational capabilities of NGOs and police services to account for the phenomenon. If they multiply their staff by 3, they will receive 3 times more complaints and declarations of hate crimes and discrimination. Because the extent of the phenomenon, the number of occurrences of the cases are too wide, are too big to be accounted for just by single NGOs having 3 full-time staff working 24/7 and trying to do the best with what they have. Still, there are a number of rules to be respected for the data to be valid. Of course, they have to track the legal action that has to be taken. Of course, they have to use a very normative definition for the form of prejudice, of intolerance, of racism that they are talking about. If the person calls you and says, well, my wife has divorced and I know for sure that she's Islamophobic, not valid, my friend. If someone is calling you and it has been the target of a hate crime, of a racist hate crime, but you clearly see that the motivation is more about his ethnicity or his origin rather than a religious motive, you are going to help him, of course. But you cannot account for this on a religious basis only. Okay? So these are the very simple rules that you need to respect, so that when I add up these data from France or Belgium to the data compiled in Canada, I can look for comparable data and not mix apples with potatoes.
Maybe just to add, I know that some of you have done the work when it comes to the issue of compiling information on bias-motivated incidents, and I think one of the useful things to consider there is the set of questions that you can ask whether something has been motivated by bias, and this is something that we call bias indicators. Has the incident occurred on a special day? Has the victim been particularly identifiable with a particular group or a community? Has the incident occurred on a specific date, on a religious holiday, or a date of a significance for a particular community? And this is all information. I'm not going to list them in all the details, but this is all information that you can find in some of our guidelines, in some of our tools that we could readily share with you. Another thing that could be of interest to you is that for some time, ODIHR has been working on a data collection tool that would be of use for practitioners, but also could be of use for non-governmental organizations. And we are going to launch it now during the Human Dimension implementation meeting. And should there be an interest from you, we can, of course, send you the link once this publication is online. And it also provides some 10 practical steps in terms of how the data collection systems should be looking like in order to be effective and efficient. So.
Yes, thank you for mentioning this. So these are a number of guidelines for data compilation that can allow you to have at least a framework that is going to produce meaningful data and avoid as much as possible data bias or cognitive bias in the way we ask questions to the victim and on what we qualify as anti-Muslim hate crimes and discrimination. On your second question, it is a bit more difficult to answer. First, because from the NGO perspective, and depending on the country, you do not have the same tools available to put governments in front of their responsibilities. And the same goes for us. From our perspective, within an international organization, we don't have the same tools and we don't have the same mechanism. And most of the time, the work that we will try to do, you will not see, okay? And you will not understand if you see it, because on the decision-making process is different, because the messages that we use with the participating states are different. Still, I think what has been very efficient, in my experience, not only in North America with CARE, but also with iEngage, Telmama, CCIF in France, and other countries, is to take first a very professional, very rational approach to tackling hate crimes and discrimination. Have a balanced approach, not advocate for nothing, but at the same time not be weak in the arguments we use to expose government or politician responsibility, but really be precise and balanced. Third, producing the data. Fourth, building alliances and building bridges across community, because on some issues, on some campaigns, you will need allies. And if Islamophobia can be defined as the othering process of Muslims, building bridges is the best way to avoid this othering. Okay, and the last point on that is: do not underestimate the impact of media. Do not underestimate the work that you have to do with media. There was a recent study conducted in France on a target group, and 74% of them, 76% of them identified media treatment as the first factor of the prejudice they go through. Okay, and these media, if you look at them, that's an ecosystem, and some of them prescribe the opinion of the others. A majority of journalists are trying to do their job, and you NGOs can help them do their job better. If they're battling with concepts and they cannot explain what is terrorism, what is jihadism, if they cannot work with this concept, try to debate with them, try to work with them to define these concepts. If these media always depict Muslim communities in a very negative manner, hold them accountable. You have produced 100 articles this year with the keyword Muslim, 95% of which were negative. If you do not know Muslims who have a positive contribution to Belgium, to Germany, to Serbia, or whatever, I can introduce you to some. Okay? So work with the media, but in an efficient manner. Do not condemn them as, okay, you guys are a bunch of racists, we don't want to work with you, we blacklist you. No, engage with them in a positive manner, in a fact-checking approach and constructive manner.